The proceeding.
Order, order. Can I call Miriam Coates to move the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I beg to move that this House has considered the impacts of smartphones and social media on children. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In this country, we often take the physical safety of our children for granted. But imagine if our streets were so lawless that it was unsafe for children to leave their homes. Imagine if on their daily walk to school, our children had to witness the beheading of strangers or the violent rape of women and girls. Imagine if, when hanging out in the local park, it was normal for hundreds of people to accost your child and encourage them to take their own lives. Imagine if it was a daily occurrence for our children to be propositioned for sex or blackmailed into stripping for strangers. Imagine if every mistake your child made was advertised on public billboards so that everyone could laugh and mock until the shame made life not worth living. But, Mr. Chairman, this is not a horror movie. This is not some imaginary Wild West. This is the digital world that our children occupy, often for hours a day. Mr. Chairman, our kids are not okay. Since 2012, suicide rates for teenage boys in the UK have doubled. They have trebled for girls. Incidences of self-harm for 10 to 12-year-old girls have increased by 364%. Anxiety rates for the under-25s have trebled. Feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, loneliness and despair are growing amongst our youngest citizens. In just 15 years, childhood has been turned on its head. And, Mr. Chairman, these trends are not unique to the UK. They are happening across the Western world, particularly in the Anglophone and Nordic countries. In the first decade of this century, life was generally improving for children across the developed world. Educational attainment was rising. Depression and anxiety were stable or falling. But something happened in 2010 to change the direction of travel. And then from 2014, the decline accelerated rapidly. Now, whether we look at the data for suicide, self-harm, gender confusion, anxiety, or education scores across the Western world, all these trends showed an inflection point in 2010 and a sharp rise from 2014. So what happened in 2010 and 2014 to so seriously undermine children's welfare? Well, as the US psychologist Professor Jonathan Haidt has charted in his recent book, The Anxious Generation, there is now overwhelming evidence that all these tragic trends have been caused by the rise of smartphones and social media. The front-facing camera iPhone was introduced in 2010, and by around 2014, smartphones and social media had become ubiquitous for children. These products were never tested on children or certified as safe for children. Yet 97% of British teens now owns a smartphone. Half of 9-year-olds use social media. In the US, the average 11 to 14-year-old spends 9 hours a day online. Now, smartphones and social media affect boys and girls differently. Some platforms, such as Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat, have particularly negative effects for girls. These apps exploit natural female tendencies for visual social comparison. But instead of just comparing themselves with classmates, girls are now judged by millions of others against often fake images of what the female body should look like. Where boys are more prone to physical aggression, girls are more likely to employ relational aggression. It's bad enough to be on the receiving end of bullying in the school playground. But when friends and strangers can send hate-filled messages at any hour of the day or night, it's unsurprising that the well-being of girls particularly has collapsed as a result of social media. I certainly will.
May I congratulate her and everybody who works with her on the amazing work that she's done. It is a remarkable achievement, and I want to thank everybody who's associated with this, and also for what's been done on the online safety bill, which actually provides imprisonment for these tech bosses who willfully make mistakes, and also deal with the situation in the way in which she and I have tried to solve the problem. I want to congratulate her.
I deeply thank my honourable friend, and I will come on to some of the improvements that he himself made to the Online Safety Act later on in my speech. So as well as girls being more susceptible to the visual social comparison, they're also more susceptible to sociogenic transmission, or what we might call social contagion, which explains the acute impact of trans ideology on girls, and we've seen a 5,000% rise in the referrals of girls to gender clinics. Girls are also, of course, more subject to sexual predation and harassment, with younger and younger girls being coaxed or threatened into sending intimate images and even filming their own sexual abuse. In 2022, the Internet Watch Foundation found 141,000 child sexual abuse images of 11 to 13-year-olds, the vast majority of which was self-generated. The front-facing smartphone camera provides the world with an open door to our little girls in their bedrooms. Now, boys are less affected by visual and social comparison, but where social media is destroying the self-confidence of teenage girls, gaming and porn is rewiring the brains of adolescent boys. Having 24-hour access to pornography superficially satisfies the sexual desires of young men, but it leaves them isolated, lacking in relationship skills, and tragically searching for more and more extreme material to become aroused. The average age of encountering online pornography, much of which is violent, degrading, and deeply disturbing, is just 13 years old, just when boys are forming their expectations about sex. Nearly half of young people now believe that girls expect sex to involve violence. Multiplayer video games hack into boys' competitiveness and physical aggression. Again, these games superficially fulfill natural male desires, but they leave boys lonely, withdrawn from the real world, lacking in real skills, and unable to find enjoyment or stimulation away from the screen. For boys and girls, time spent on social media represents an enormous opportunity cost. Hours of doom scrolling are hours not spent gaining physical and relational experiences that will equip them with the resilience they need for real life. We have substituted a phone-based childhood for a play-based childhood with tragic consequences. Even our schools don't provide a safe haven. Recent research by Policy Exchange found that only 11% of secondary schools have an effective phone ban, with the overwhelming majority of children still able to access their devices at school. Interestingly, those schools that had implemented an effective ban were significantly more likely to be rated outstanding by Ofsted and achieved on average 1 or 2 grades higher at GCSE, despite being more typically in deprived areas. 43% of older teenagers say social media has distracted them from schoolwork enough to impact their grades. One child told a Parent Kind survey, "I can't focus on my school homework because every 5 minutes I get distracted and go back onto my phone. Occasionally, I'll see triggering content on social media, such as suicide or gory images." Social media offers constant, instant gratification, with a dopamine hit and a new distraction every few seconds. Is it any wonder that children are less and less able to concentrate, to focus on intellectually demanding tasks like academic learning? For the first time ever, IQ is falling across the Western world. And the international PISA data shows that maths, reading and science scores have all declined since 2014. Now, some question the causal relationship between social media and smartphones and the decline in adolescent well-being. Many blame the financial crash in 2008. But why would these trends only affect the under-25s? Some blame the UK Conservative government. But how can localised economic, political or social conditions account for the collapse in childhood well-being across the Western world all at the same time? I certainly will.
Congratulate her for securing this very important and timely debate and for the excellent speech that she is making. She talks about children and young people in terms of the scorching number of hours that they are online and the very high percentage of children who are engaging in this virtual world rather than the physical world. But there is one group of children who are rather shielded and protected from the influences that she describes. That's the children of tech moguls and those who work in the industry. Does she think that this is very telling and, in equal measure, absolutely damning?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and it is hugely significant that those who really know how these apps and algorithms work firmly believe they're not safe for children. And Steve Jobs famously remarked when asked if the iPad was addicted that he assumed so because he had designed it to be so. Coming back to the causal links between social media and smartphones and the decline in childhood well-being, Jonathan Haidt and Jean Twenge both present compelling causative evidence of the harms of social media. And in his Substack, Haidt describes 6 experiments that found that when social life moves rapidly online, mental health declines, especially for girls. Not one study failed to find a harmful effect. It is now impossible to deny the devastating impact that smartphones and social media are having on our children. Now, some say this is a parenting problem, that parents need to pay more attention to their children's phone use. But in a survey of older teenagers, half said they'd found ways to bypass parental controls. But it's not just screen time that is so difficult for parents or children to manage. It is all but impossible to control the content to which children are exposed. And as whistleblowers like Arturo Bejar and Frances Haugen have testified, social media companies knowingly use algorithms to feed children harmful and addictive content. I certainly will.
Well, I thank you for securing the debate and bringing us together to discuss this important topic. But back to the problems that parents have. I mean, there is an element. If your child is the only kid in the class who doesn't have a smartphone, then the parent themselves are going to suffer from the peer pressure that we are perhaps trying to protect the children from. Does she see a way around that?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. This is a collective action problem. The costs of being the only child or the only parent without that phone are too high, far too high for ordinary parents to resist. And I'll come on to what I see as some of the solutions later on, but he's absolutely right to highlight that issue. So even if the material being viewed is benign, smartphones and social media themselves are highly addicted, and they provide a constant off-ramp to our mental focus and erode our concentration. And I wonder how many honourable members in the last 11 minutes have thought about their phone or looked at their phone, and I certainly have. And as I said, in 2011, when Steve Jobs was asked if the iPad might be addictive, he remarked that he had designed it to be so. And we know as adults how difficult it is to control our own phone use. But the average child gets 237 notifications a day. That's a concentration-busting, addiction-fueling dopamine hit every 4 seconds of waking time. If there were no laws against the sale of tobacco, drugs or alcohol to children, we would not expect parents to be able to defend their children from the might of Big Pharma or Big Tobacco. Yet somehow we do expect ordinary parents to be able to protect their children from the vested interest of the likes of Meta, TikTok, X and Apple, the wealthiest and most powerful companies the world has ever seen. In fact, they are more powerful than most countries, and I think Apple has $3 trillion in the bank, which is as much as our GDP. So they are more powerful than many countries. Now, parents could, as my honourable friend remarked, refuse to give their child a smartphone altogether. But the fact that 97% of teens and half of all 9-year-olds do have one gives some indication of the extreme pressure and the social isolation experienced by the only child in the school or class without a phone, and we surely cannot believe that 97% of parents are bad parents. I certainly will.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and I thank you for this excellent speech that she's given. Does she agree with me that there's 3 things I believe that we could do? Is that we could ban smartphones in schools, we should ban social media up to the age of 16 years old, but also as adults we should take on personal responsibility, which is what I believe Conservative MPs do better than anybody else, and that's that when we are with our children we should keep off the phones ourselves, or at least spend an hour a day where we are not on our phones, and so we can set an example to the next generation coming through.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and he's completely right, of course, and we all, I think, studying this topic has made me think much more carefully about my own phone use, and seeing some of the apps that try and disrupt my concentration as actually big companies trying to take my time is quite a helpful way of seeing it. But I think also, as with alcohol, drugs, all sorts of other things, we do need to recognise that there is a difference between adults and children. Adults should have free choice about how they use their time, and this is about protecting children. But whatever the solutions, this cannot go on, and the problems associated with heavy screen use are presenting younger and younger. A fifth of 3- and 4-year-olds now have their own smartphones. And a study last year published in the Journal of American Medical Association Pediatrics edition found that more screen time for children aged 1 is associated with developmental delays in communication at ages 2 and 4. So there's little wonder that more and more children are starting primary school unable to communicate, with behavioural and emotional difficulties, and this year a quarter of school starters were still in nappies. The economic cost of this assault on childhood will be devastating. We have record numbers of young people signed off work with anxiety. Waiting time for child mental health services are measured in years. Our economy and our welfare state simply cannot afford to support mass worklessness amongst the young. There are huge geopolitical risks too. We spend billions of pounds a year on defence, and yet through the Chinese-owned TikTok, we allow our political enemies direct access to our children in their bedrooms. In China, under 14s are limited to 40 minutes a day on TikTok, and endless doom scrolling is interrupted by 5-second delays. Chinese children are only shown specially selected inspiring content promoting science, educational and historical content. But in the US and the UK, TikTok feeds our teens with stupid dance videos, hypersexualised content and political propaganda. TikTok is now the most favourable single source of news for British teens. Our emerging generation is being educated through indoctrination from foreign-owned social media, an education that is often anti-democratic, anti-Western and anti-truth. Our enemies are rubbing their hands in glee. Now, in Britain, many people are looking to the Online Safety Act to address these enormous issues. And the Act, when it is fully implemented, will bring some improvements. It should make it more difficult for children under 13 to gain access to social media. It should make it less likely that children encounter the most harmful content. But even if Ofcom can hold tech companies to account in making these protections highly effective, children will still have free access to social media platforms from the age of 13. The Online Safety Act, though welcome, will not rescue our children. But, Mr. Chairman, the tide is turning. There is hope that the world is waking up to the enormous damage that smartphones and social media are doing to childhood. Governments across the world are taking action. In the US, Florida has banned social media for under 14s. New York has proposed legislation banning addictive algorithms for children. Congress is taking action against TikTok. New French government guidance says that social media should not be accessible to under 18s. President Macron has spoken eloquently about the need for an age of digital adulthood. And in a speech just yesterday, our own Prime Minister raised concerns about children being exposed to bullying, sexualised content and even self-harm online. Here in the UK, the parents of Molly Russell, Brianna Jai and Mia Janin, who tragically lost their lives to social media, have bravely spoken about the need to act. Campaign groups, Smartphone-Free Childhood, Delay Smartphones and Safe Screens are organising despairing parents en masse, calling for collective as well as government action to preserve childhood. All of them are calling for children under 16 to be freed from the phone-based childhood. And the polling on this issue is decisive. Last week, the Sunday Times published polling by More in Common that showed that 7 in 10 Brits think social media is having a negative impact on children. 7 in 10 support banning social media companies from allowing accounts for anyone under 18. Polling from Parent Kind produced similar results. It found 77% of primary school parents back a ban on smartphone for under 16s. And 74% of older teenagers themselves believe that social media is harmful. Now, some in Westminster think that using regulation and legislation to protect children from smartphones and social media is an overreaction or even an unconservative thing to do. And yet, in the country as a whole, Conservative voters are the most likely to support strong action, with 72% of Tory voters in favour of a ban on the sale of smartphones to children, compared to 61% of Labour voters. Perhaps the only Conservatives who don't support these measures are those in SW1. Now, the evidence is unequivocal. Smartphones and social media are making our children sadder, sicker and more stupid. It's just not good enough to shrug our shoulders and fall back on tired clichés like the horse has bolted or the genie's out the bottle. The demand for action from the government is clear and growing. So, Mr. Chairman, what can be done? Well, firstly, we must insist that tech companies use age verification tools that are highly effective, so that no underage children have access to social media or pornography. Secondly, we must raise the legal age to use social media accounts to 16. This could be done with an Online Safety Act amendment bill. Thirdly, the government should urgently fund phone pouches or phone lockers for all secondary schools so that all of our children can be free to make the most of their education. Fourth, we must tackle the scourge of internet pornography. If Twitter, which is the most common platform for children to encounter porn, and others, can't keep porn off their sites, they must be forced to ban under 18s from their platforms. And we must update the law so that all sorts of content that is completely illegal in offline pornography, non-consensual sex, violent, degrading, dangerous acts, the appearance of minors, are illegal online too. There is no excuse for this lack of parity between online and offline porn, and indeed 56% of the British public would like to ban online porn entirely. Fifth, we need a public health campaign to explain to parents of small children that smartphones and internet devices are not safe for babies and toddlers, that screen use can cause irreversible damage and developmental delays. Six, just as we have incentivised the research and development of new technologies in other fields, such as energy and agriculture, we should incentivise the development of a new phone that is suitable for children, one that allows one-to-one messaging, phone calls, satellite maps and utility apps such as online banking, but where there is no internet browser or ability to install apps. And seventh, we should ban TikTok from operating in the UK. I am not for one moment saying that we shouldn't teach children how to use the internet safely on a computer, or that there aren't huge advantages in smartphone technology. I, for one, would be lost without Google Maps, literally. But the internet should be a tool to enhance our lives, not a means through which children can be addicted and exploited. We shouldn't make the mistake of believing that all new technologies represent progress. Without a shadow of a doubt, the tech companies will fight all of these reforms. Just like the tobacco industry before them, big tech's business model relies on getting children hooked on their products to provide a lifelong revenue stream. But it's not only the tech industry who will oppose banning social media for children. There are many well-meaning people and organisations and children's charities who will argue that social media has benefits for children, particularly vulnerable children, such as those who are neurodiverse or have mental health problems, are LGBT or gender questioning. But this is a desperately naive position, because the more vulnerable the child, the more at risk they are online. And if you don't believe me, try creating a TikTok account or a Discord account or a Reddit account in the name of a teenager with one of those issues, and you will find your feed filled with porn, predators, pro-anorexia content, all content to draw the most vulnerable children into a world where they are utterly defenceless. So many testimonies of children speak of a stolen childhood. And as one girl told Parentkind, the other day I was on Instagram. Some random guy started saying I looked like a fat pig and no one likes me. When I tried to get past that, I saw a short where a girl looked really skinny and spoke about body goals. I felt so useless and ugly that I cried myself to sleep. Defending children from this Wild West, I certainly will.
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend. It's quite well known the mental health impacts, but does my honourable friend agree that we need to see academia, the NHS, health professionals, to actually look more on the physical implications on the body? We know it also creates sleep disturbances, etc., but the physical implications as well.
I thank my right honourable friend for her intervention, and she's certainly right. Much more research is needed in the wider impacts. And I think there was a study published just yesterday about the correlation between using your phone whilst eating and obesity, for example. So I think there are a whole range of different issues that we could explore. And I would highly recommend Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, for a thorough exploration of all the global trends in this area. So defending children from this Wild West is not the action of a nanny state. It is the moral imperative for governments across the world. Now, Mr. Chairman, in the past, Britain has had a strong record when it comes to child protection legislation. There have been a number of moments in our history where a new danger to children has emerged, public outcry has ensued, and Parliament has been called upon to act. In 1838, the Husker Pit disaster in my constituency led to the passing of the Mines Act, prohibiting the employment of children in mines. In 1885, after public outcry over young girls being sold into prostitution, this House raised the age of sexual consent to 16. Again, following public outcry over the sale of alcohol to children, in 1901, Parliament restricted its sale to under-16s. We are at a similar moment in history. We will look back and ask why we allowed paedophiles, predators, greedy capitalists and foreign enemies unfettered access to our children online. The evidence of harm is irrefutable. The public outcry is growing. Now is the time to act. This government does have less than a year in office, but if we could pass the Coronavirus Act in just one day, surely we can use these next few months to introduce effective legislation to protect children from a real and present danger. Indeed, is there any better reason to be in government than to have the opportunity and the power to rescue the next generation?
Superb. Order. In view of the number of people who want to speak and the pressure we've got on time, I'm afraid I've no alternative but to impose a 4-minute timetable on speeches, which I will strictly enforce. The question is that this House has considered the impact of smartphones and social media on children. Neil Harvey.
Thank you, Sir George. I congratulate my honourable friend in this situation from Penistone and Stocksbridge for her outstanding speech and for her commitment to this hugely important issue that should concern anyone who's involved in the care or parenting of young people. You know, the briefing that we were provided with for this debate highlighted a few specific stats that I just want to draw some quick attention to before I move on to the substance of the points I want to raise. So there's 99% of children spend time online, 90% of children own a mobile phone, and 3/4 of social media users aged between 8 and 17 have their own account or profile on at least one of the large platforms. Now, those stats show how ubiquitous it is for young people to be able to access these various different sites. But actually, the question is not about whether it's good for young people to have the latest gadget so that they are you know, keeping up with their peers and you know, have all of the social cachet that goes along with having a nice smartphone. What that smartphone represents is a portal into a very different world. Now, when I was a youngster, it was very easy for a youngster to go and buy cigarettes, to go into a pub and get booze across the counter, even when they were obviously underage. Now, that would never happen now because we've made significant changes that limit the sale of harmful products to youngsters. But the world online, the portal that these phones let children access, is so unregulated, and I think the point's already been made. It is the Wild West. The internet is the Wild West. And I want to draw attention to a few very brief stories on that. So there was a post on Twitter last week that I read from a father whose 13-year-old boy was part of a WhatsApp group along with friends in his school, and there were some friends of friends in that group. And the father discovered that on that portal they were circulating images of people being beheaded. And then later he discovered another post from a friend of a friend where people who had live streamed their suicide by gun had put together a compilation of those images. And this was being circulated in a group of 13-year-old boys. He also drew attention to sites that encourage suicide among young men. Now, there are many issues that need to be addressed, but it's the ability to communicate disturbing images and to provide access to young people that is the most concerning. And the one thing that I would highlight is that when you install a game for your child and you think this is an innocuous game, most of these games have chat functions. They have a chat room hidden away behind the game. And within that chat room, you will find predators, extortionists, and many other people there for nefarious purposes. So it's so important that we have proper regulation and we dismantle the tools with which these nefarious people are able to access young people. So I fully support the work of the Honourable Lady. Thanks very much. Wasn't expecting this.
I think I heard my name. I'm very grateful to be called to speak in this debate, and I will add, as my other colleagues have done, my extreme thanks to my honourable friend for Penistone and Stocksbridge. She has set out the whole case for change, and what's more, she's advanced some extremely practical suggestions, legislative and other, for how we go about achieving that change. So therefore I won't focus my remarks on that. I will reflect my personal experience and perhaps add another dimension. I'm a mother of 4 and also a grandmother of 2 children, 2.5 and a baby. Now, when my own children were growing up, I had my own battles with the internet, as it was at the time, and phones that they had. I had my battles with video games and all the other things that they were involved in, both at school and at home. And it was really, really tough. It was extremely tough to have those battles with your own children and draw that line between what is educational and what is dangerous and what is addictive. But the world has changed so much since then. Mr. Howarth, and we are in a new world. And that is why I say to people who may be watching this and say, it is parental responsibility, these parents are failing their children, they need to do more. That really misses a big part of the picture. Now, I accept that we do need to ask parents to step up. Whatever we do as a government, we will still require parents to take responsibility. Parents cannot outsource everything to the government. Yeah. We as Conservatives must be bold enough to say to parents, look, we have brought in these protections, but if you are trying to get around it by just giving your own phone to your child, of course, you're going to have a harmful impact on your own child. So take responsibility, but we have a clear moral case that my friend has set out to act. Now, I'm the first one also to believe in freedom, but I think we've all agreed here that this is not freedom. We're actually removing freedom from children, and we're removing freedom from parents. I just want to focus on two other points in my remarks because time is short. I've been made aware of an absolutely fantastic organisation called Smartphone Free Childhood, and I understand that they are now setting up groups all around the country. I pay tribute to their work. I'm really interested to hear from people locally who are involved in this work at the grassroots level. I want to hear from parents and families and young people in Redditch, in my constituency. I would really be interested to hear from people of their experiences on the ground. Do they consider that the existing protections we have of banning phones in schools are going far enough? Are they working? What is your experience like in your own classroom, in your family, and most importantly, in your peer group? Is that working? Do I need to get involved? Can I help in any way on the ground at the grassroots level? The other point I think we have to also make, and I welcome the Minister's consideration of this. I know he's not the Minister for this particular area, but perhaps he can speak to his colleagues, and I certainly will be doing. My honourable friend mentioned the impact of very early mobile phone use on emotional, social and cognitive development. Now, we also, in this country, have a concerning rise of children who are in the SEND category, children with special needs, developmental delays, cognitive, emotional, behavioural, complex problems, and autism spectrum disorders as well. Now, this is a huge area. We are seeing a rise in these conditions, and of course they then require very specialist provision from the local authorities. And I know that there is huge pressure on local authorities to provide places for children. I am really interested to know what research, if any, has been done to link mobile phone and social media use to the rise of these conditions in our children and young people, and even young adults, because some of these conditions are extant.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Howarth.
Thank you, Sir George. It's good to see you in your place. And I would also congratulate the member for a very good introduction to a very complex area, and it's a pressing area. This isn't an academic exercise. These issues have real-world consequences for real families. In Stirling, in Dunblane, just recently, we saw a terrible case of Murray Dowie. Murray was a bright, happy 16-year-old. He was football daft. Stirling Albion was his team. He was well-liked. He was popular. And he took his own life after being a victim of sextortion via his Instagram chat account. And I rise... It's extortion being a horrible word for a horrible thing, but it is something that we really must make particularly young people more aware of, because the risks are real and clear. Now, I rise to intervene in this debate today at the request of Murray's parents, Ros and Mark Dowie, who've been through hell, and they want action. They've remained incredibly dignified and brave throughout their ordeal, their ongoing ordeal, but they want to see action, and I think there's a lot of unity across the chamber that we do need to do more on this topic. We've not done nothing, but we do need to do more than we've seen. I've also been contacted by hundreds of parents, and I won't if I may, I need to make progress. I've been contacted by hundreds of parents across Stirling who do want to see action likewise. It's up to us to decide what that action needs to be, but I think the awareness that we need to do more is a good place to start. Now, turning to the petition itself, I have to say I'm less convinced that banning smartphone access for under 16-year-olds would be effective. I think it could encourage a backlash. I think it would be very difficult to enforce and regulate. But I am very drawn to the idea that restricting smartphone access in schools would be a sensible thing to do. I should declare an interest. My husband's a secondary school teacher, and he says day in, day out, the impact in terms of distraction, in terms of mental health that youngsters have, particularly in a school environment. But where we should be looking at access to smartphones, and of course we should, and I'd stress I'm pro-technology. I think children should have access to the incredible technological advancements underway, but it's not safe. Now, we insist that car manufacturers fit seat belts and catalytic converters to make their products more safe or less noxious. The tech companies need to do the same. So I'm concerned about the lack of protections the tech companies have implemented, the lack of effective regulation, because our regulators don't seem to have much teeth, at least until recently. I'm also concerned that police and legal enforcement across jurisdictions is nowhere near as joined up as the tech companies and their products are. And I'm also unconvinced that tech companies cooperate when things go wrong to the extent that they need to. Now, this environment is not as safe as it needs to be, and there are things that I think we could do in order to make it safer. But I don't think we've heard reference to putting the genie back into the bottle. I think we need to focus on making the online environment safer rather than restricting access to smartphones. I think the Online Safety Act is a good place to start. I was glad to see that Ofcom in the last couple of weeks has its consultation about robust age checks, safer algorithms and effective moderation of chat and content. I think that's a good start. I think it's long overdue, frankly, and I think more needs to be done, and I would urge Ofgem to greater efforts. But in Murray's case particularly, we have seen that the law enforcement and the judicial cooperation of the police and regulatory authorities across jurisdictions is nowhere near as joined up as it needs to be. That is something that we urgently need to address. Because to close, Sir George, tech has always moved faster than the law. That's not unusual in and of itself. But the law needs to catch up, because this is having real-world consequences for real families in all of our communities. And I'll work with anybody to those ends. Thank you, Sir George.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you very much, George. Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. May I congratulate my friend, the honourable member for Penistone and Stocksbridge, one of, I think, Parliament's finest at this present moment in time, and hope we'll see her in her place for very much longer. Look, Sir George, am going to focus specifically when it comes to the points that were raised regarding these phones in schools. Having spent my entire professional career before entering this place as a secondary school teacher, and in fact as a head of year, which therefore meant I had to deal with the behaviour, the attendance of young people, and of course, albeit briefly, having been a Minister for School Standards, what I will say loud and clear is that it is appalling that despite continued guidance being issued by the government since 2010 that smartphones are not to be used in school, only 11% have actually taken the brave and bold step in actually making it enforced within their schools that phones are put away and they are not visible or not reachable until the very end of that school day. And it's bizarre when we consider the fact that most of these schools then go on to achieve the outstanding. If you look at Michaela, one of, I think, the finest schools in this country, that's actually got very strict rules, and I implore anyone to go and visit, as I've done a number of occasions, to see the fact that when those phones are away and the results they produce are far better than most grammar schools and private schools in this country, because they are making very clear that the attention span of those young people is on the knowledge-rich curriculum that is in front of them. And I am quite embarrassed, to be quite frank, with my former profession. There's not enough head teachers with enough backbone to either take the fight to parents who may want to push back, or to pupils who may want to moan and groan, or quite simply fight the progressive educationalists who seem to think that somehow the phone is a tool for learning in the classroom and that we should have A3, A2 bits of paper where children spend their time Googling to try and mind map themselves without any proper guidance regarding understanding the processes involved, for example, in things as much simple as making chocolate to other ideas about how democracy was formed. It is from the expert in the classroom, the teacher, who stands at the front, that delivers the knowledge, that ensures that those young people have the ability to critically respond to different ideas, without just having found information and simply copy and pasted it off their phone and written it onto a piece of paper that has not then cognitively been taken in and not critically analysed in the way that it should be. Happy to give way.
Thank you. Look at Parliament. They've pushed for this paperless society. And with the select committees and everything, they want it on our tablets. And for decades, industry has pushed for this as well. Don't you think does my own friend think it's had an impact? And maybe we should return to having paper again. And otherwise, because I'm addicted myself. And so how can we actually tell our children off when we're addicted ourselves?
Thank you, Sir George. I will keep my comments brief to make sure we don't impact others' time. But what I will say, and I totally agree with my honourable friend, because I'm still a dinosaur. I like paper, I like to scribble over things. When I was a teacher, I liked the physical paper to be able to write comments on. I certainly didn't want to try and use interesting gadgets to try and get across. And whilst there is great technology like Google Classroom that can be used effectively, ultimately we shouldn't move away from paper-based exercise, because actually, particularly for handwriting skills, which is so important for young people, then fewer and fewer of them actually having that ability to practice that, because we've all fallen into the trap of being able to type very quickly on our phones. So to sum up, Sir George, for me, what I will say loud and clear, and the Minister I know gets this, I know he's been working tremendously hard on the Online Safety Act and what can be done to make sure that we actually enforce the rules that have come through that legislation, but also looking at the wider debate around this area. But he needs to go back now to the Department for Education. We need to end the era of guidance and now make it enforceable and directional from government, that schools should have the funding, as my honourable friend pointed out, to have these lockers, all these storage boxes, in order to make sure these phones are away and children can enjoy a childhood in the school day without the phone. Because believe me, as a head of year, I was sick and tired of having to deal with parents coming into school telling me that their child was receiving harmful online bullying content in the evening via social media communications, which is totally out of the jurisdiction of myself as a head of year and out of the jurisdiction of the school itself. And it was then putting on huge workload onto teachers. It was leading to major behavioural issues, which are number 1 and number 3 on every single survey as to why people are leaving the teaching profession. So it is therefore, I implore the government to do this, and I hope every school will actually take its action itself now and look to those Michaelas and make sure they deliver that smartphone-free education.
Thank you, Sir George. And I'd like to thank my honourable friend from Penistone and Stocksbridge as well. It's one of the most superb speeches I've heard in my entire time in this House. In the 1940s, advertising men told us that more doctors smoke Camel cigarettes than any other cigarette. And as the evidence piled up, they started to say it was complicated. It's not obvious what's going on with smoking cancer. It's very complicated. And it's a reminder of the ruthlessness that people can deploy when there's lots of money to be made. And when I was a public health minister at DHSC, I was keen that we started to treat this as a major emerging public health problem. Smoking is going down, I'm proud of that, but the problems, oh boy, the problems caused by smartphones and social media are going up and up and up. And the trends around the world, the growth, the explosive growth of children's mental health problems and self-harm in the real world, or since the 2010s roughly, and that happening all over the world at the same time. The evidence is compelling, and increasingly the causal evidence is also there. So it's clear that it's time to act. Now, there are many channels which these things cause problems through. It's not just the time taken up. It's not just the lack of sleep. It's not just the increased ADHD and the lack of concentration. It's the more subtle things as well. Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian comms theorist, said that the medium is the message, and he meant that about TV. As well as what people were watching, it mattered that people just sat there passively. And with smartphones, they isolate us, and for young people, they provide an infinite scroll through the edited highlights of other people's lives. There's a famous social science experiment in which people were given bowls of tomato soup and told to eat as much as they wanted. But what they weren't told is that the bowls of tomato soup were filling up from the bottom. And people would drink extraordinary amounts of tomato soup, literally gallons of the stuff, gut-busting amounts. And that is a metaphor for what the infinite scroll and the world of social media has done for us. Young people now effectively living like politicians, living a second life in the mind of other people, constantly thinking about their image, trying to post what they're doing rather than living in the moment, with disastrous consequences. Now, so smartphones and social media are not the only things driving these problems. Adverse childhood experiences are a big part of why people have severe mental health problems. The increased overcosting of children in the real world is another part of the story. But clearly now, I think the smartphones and social media part of the story is a big bit of it. We have a problem, and it's a collective action problem. Parents don't want to give their kids tablets and social media devices as early as they do, but they feel the peer pressure to do so. And the earlier you give your kids these things, the worse they'll do. A Sapiens Lab study shows that incredibly clearly. And kids don't want it either. When we did our 2018 report of the Science and Technology Committee, Science and Technology Committee report on this issue in 2018, found, when we talked to a lot of young people, that they would like to have a smartphone-free childhood. And I'm not surprised that we're now seeing, over recent weeks, literally, tens of thousands of parents now joining these groups to try and get smartphones out of our schools. So the question that I really want to hear the Minister directly address as he sums up at the end is, we were promised a consultation on these things, and it should be out now. When is it coming? I really want a date. And the second thing is, when can we implement a proper ban on phones in schools? Yeah. It's already been mentioned that the Policy Exchange research shows that only 1 in 10 schools are actually doing a proper ban, where they take phones away at the start of the day. And so children don't constantly get distracted by phones. They're not thinking about the next text. They're not slipping it out in class. And they have a blissful moment when they're living in the real world and free from smartphones and social media. And that should be a beachhead for us to start to change the norm, starting with schools, but working outwards, about the effects of our increasing exposure of children to smartphones and social media. So please, will the Minister undertake to look seriously at the option of funding and insisting on a proper smartphone ban in all of our schools, so that we can give our children something that all of us enjoyed, a childhood in the real world, not just trapped on a screen.
An old jail wardener.
Thank you, Sir George. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate my honourable friend for securing this important debate. I rise as a father of 3 young children, and I'm very concerned about this impact, the impact of smartphones and of social media. And it isn't just MPs here. It's not just the polling that we've already persuasively heard from my honourable friend. But in the short time that I have today, I want to focus on the empirical evidence that now does prove the detrimental effects of these technologies on children's development and on their health. A study by the University of Cambridge revealed that frequent smartphone use amongst adolescence is linked to the decreased academic achievement and delayed emotional maturity of these children. This is the University of Cambridge that has done detailed work into this. It's not just on a whim that we rise today to talk about the problems. It's as a result of now clear evidence. And as the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health warns, excessive screen time can lead to a host of physical health problems too, including obesity, sleep disturbances, and vision problems. The NHS itself already advises that the blue light emitted by screens disrupts the production of melatonin, the hormone responsible for regulating sleep, leading to poorer sleep quality and duration, particularly amongst children. So in addition to the detrimental effects on physical health, in addition to the detrimental effects on their academic performance, it is of course important also to look at the research that highlights the impact of smartphones and social media on children's mental and emotional well-being. And again, leading universities have conducted research. Research by the University of Bristol and University College London have found that children who spent more time on social media reported higher levels of depressive symptoms. And another study by the Office for National Statistics revealed a significant increase in mental health issues amongst adolescents in recent years. Now, as my honourable friend said, it is not a coincidence that smartphone and social media use has risen in the same period. It is caused by it. And so, in light of this empirical evidence, it is clear that children's unrestricted access to smartphones and social media poses a great risk to their development and their well-being. I remember my first phone, a Nokia 3210. The high point was playing Snakes. I remember the Sony Ericsson T68, which had a detachable camera. This was the first time a camera was on a phone. And I remember my first BlackBerry, which put email in my pocket. And if my honourable friends' mailboxes are anything like mine, I think that's a mixed blessing, right? But as parents of our children and as members of Parliament for this nation's children, it is our responsibility, it is our duty to take action to protect our children and to give them their childhood back. And it is only by limiting exposure to smartphones and from these harmful influences, banning them in schools and raising the age for social media use, that we will be able to safeguard the physical, mental and emotional health of our children and secure the brighter future for generations to come that I know the Minister and this government wants to achieve.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking the honourable member, my honourable friend Penistone Stockton, for securing this really important debate. I agree with so much of what colleagues have said about teenagers and adolescents, but I particularly wanted to mention very early children. very young children. 90% of the brain is developed before the age of 5. That is when we learn how to communicate, we learn how to think. It's when we learn the problem-solving skills, our problem-solving resilience skills. Those really early years are when the brain is wired. And last week I visited one of my primary schools and I spoke to the head teacher, Faye White, and she explained that the way that she sees children using their devices today is completely different to plonking a child down in front of Billimore or Post and Pat like I used to do. Children scrolling really rapidly. Watch, scroll, move on to the next thing. And what she is seeing this doing to children is that they are, for many of them, losing the ability to concentrate. They don't develop the ability to concentrate for anything but really short periods of time. And Faye spoke to me about her deep concern that this is driving some of this increase in more children with ADHD and other needs. So really young children are being impacted. The Honourable Member also mentioned the most vile of content, the child sexual abuse, children being groomed to perform sexual acts in their bedrooms, directed from afar by hideous online perpetrators, often filmed without their knowledge. The content is so disgusting. At its most basic, it's sexual posing, but it goes into sadism, degradation, and even performing sexual acts with animals. She mentioned the work that IWF do to identify this content and take it off the internet. What she did not mention was that last year, 2,401 of those images were identified by IWF as involving children in the age range of 3 to 6. The question is not, is this okay, colleagues? The question is, what do we, as legislators, do about it? And the Online Safety Act will make a big difference, but we must not think the job is finished. Like many others, I was deeply moved by Brianna's mum's call for a child phone. We have child-safe car seats. We have child locks on medicine bottles. We put child locks on the doors that contain our household cleaning products. Why can't we build child safety by design into phones for children? So the Monday after Brianna's mums said those words about we need a child-safe phone, I put my name down on the list to introduce a 10-minute rule bill in this place. I will get a chance to present the bill before the summer recess, and I hope to use this to get people thinking. My bill would introduce point-of-sale controls so that if a phone is being bought for a child or if you're passing your phone on to a child, the parents will be able to give access to and information on parental controls. It will introduce app store-level controls similar to those being proposed in France, so age-inappropriate apps cannot be downloaded, or if the phone is being used by a child, they cannot be used. And thirdly, to protect children from paedophiles in their bedrooms, I will have also the bill introduce a new law on system-level controls. So iOS and Android stop a child from uploading that content.
Listen, if we need any more evidence of how addictive and distracting smartphones are, I encourage anyone to look at the House of Commons chambers later. We are all grown adults. We are in serious business, and we know we are on television. Yet we cannot often leave our phones. I am guilty of this as well, fiddling and faffing. How the hell can we expect children to stay off their phones and concentrate in schools if that is what they are seeing all around them? And education is so vital. We spend a lot of time in this place arguing about how to do it right, and those years and hours in the classroom should not be compromised. And we also need to give teachers who work so hard to qualify, it's vocational, they want to be there, they want to do their best job. We need to give them the best chance of teaching well. And as Professor Jonathan Haidt says, for Policy Exchange is an excellent, excellent report. Back in our day at school,
school, having a mobile phone would have been the equivalent of bringing our television sets, along with our video cassette recorders, our record players, our walkie-talkies, and any other communications and games that we could, and sticking them on our school desks. We just wouldn't do it, so why are we allowing it now? Now, I wrote about this issue of banning smartphones in schools in the Stroud News and Journal. I thank all the parents that got in touch from around my district. One gentleman, Leo, a father, he said, despite being a millennial and working in digital marketing, so his profession, I've personally decided to move away from smartphones about 3 years ago, partly in anticipation of conversations with my kids regarding this matter. He's talked about this on LinkedIn. He encouraged me to look at the smartphone-free childhood movement. I really applaud Us For Them and many other organisations as well. So I personally think that with schools, that the argument about whether we need to ban smartphones and do it well is basically won. The question is how, and it is tough for some schools, and I think that's why I encourage people to look at the Policy Exchange list of recommendations that includes schools, Ofsted, politicians. It encourages everybody to think those things through. But when I was in the park with my two little ones this weekend, so they're 1 and 3, I am like a proper helicopter parent. I am like shepherding them around, worrying about them going up and down slides, and I'm there and that and this, that. But yet, we are giving children phones to have in their pockets and in their bedrooms that are actually encouraging bullying, harassment, violent porn, dick pics, cyber flashing, eating disorders, health, self-harm and exploitation, as many colleagues have talked about. So I spent all that time thinking about how to protect my kids from the world, yet these things are going to be very live in their little lives very soon if we don't do something about it, and I don't think it's good enough. Now, one of my campaigns that I've been running for years now is to tackle anonymous abuse. We do need to think through the fact that it doesn't matter what this place does, some children are likely to end up online and end up on social media, even if we put the best bans and the best measures in place. Now, what we have tried to do, myself and Clean Up the Internet, is we're requiring tech companies to put ID verification options, which allows people to only follow people who are real people and verified online and be followed by them. Now, the government has legislated for this. Tech companies know how valuable it is because they are charging people for their blue ticks. They're charging me. I've signed up just to see what it does. They charge me like 11 quid a month on Instagram just to have the privilege of saying that I am who I say I am. But we've got to go faster. Now, Ofcom have got a lot to do, but they are not implementing this quick enough. Real people can be caught quicker if we have their identification behind them. We need to put that in place, and I ask the Minister to fast forward what Ofcom are doing in that respect. Thank you.
Room for one last speaker, and I'll have to restrict her to 2 minutes. Leah Nietzsche. I will be calling the front benches at 10:30.
Mr. Chairman, I will be quick. I thank my honourable friend for this very, very important debate. This is very, very sad, but it's very, very important, and it's good to have the Minister in his place, but we need action from the Department for Education. There is no excuse for head teachers, for governors, not to implement mobile phone bans in every school and every nursery school, because we know we have problems in those, and colleges if necessary, because we need to stop this. We need to halt it now. Having a child and being a parent and a family with children in is a precious thing. Sadly, too often, for the last 4 years, I've been travelling on the train to come to this place and back. I have seen 2 families who have not plugged their toddlers and their children into mobile phones or devices because they just want them to be quiet. In fact, most of those families are not only doing that, they are isolating their children by putting headphones on them as well. So those children are not interacting with parents, they're not looking out in the countryside, they're not learning about the world behind them, around them. We need to have some very quick action. The Online Safety Act, as we've already said, is going to do lots of things, but it took 5 years for this place to get things moving. We need some very short, sharp bills, and we need the Department for Education to actually crack on and tell schools that these dangerous devices should not be allowed in schools, and we need help for parents. It is difficult, but you know, the word parent is parent, it's not friend. You are there to parent your children. We not only need our tech giants to get on with this as well, we need our broadcasters, we need our organisations like BBC and ITV to get a grip, and also our internet providers. Everybody now needs to work together because this is vitally important.
Kirsty Black.
Thank you very much, Sir George, and thank you for chairing this debate today. Congratulations to the member for Penistone and Stocksbridge for bringing this debate. I want to talk about a number of things. I'm going to talk about safety online by design, the safety of devices by design, and parental and child education. And just to confuse everyone, I'll do that in reverse order. So starting off with parental and child education, Ofcom have got a media literacy strategy consultation on the go just now. They also have got the strategy around protecting children that is being consulted on. Both of those things are incredibly important. We have a massive parental knowledge gap at the moment. In about 15 or 20 years, this won't be nearly such a problem in terms of educating parents, because those parents will have grown up online. I'm one of the first generation of parents that did grow up online. My kids are 10 and 13. I got the internet at home, not in the way that my kids did, but I got the internet at home when I was 6, 7, something around that. So, you know, there's hardly anybody in this house that grew up on the internet. There's hardly anybody in my children's cohort of parents, peers' parents, that grew up online. So I know very well the dangers that there are online. I am able to talk to my children about that. I am able, and I have the privilege and the ability and the time to put into ensuring that I know everything about everything that they're doing online. So whether that's about knowing the ins and outs of how Fortnite works, whether that's knowing the ins and outs of how all of the games that they are playing online work. I'm lucky enough to be able to do that. Some parents do not have either the time or the energy or the capacity to be able to do that.
I commend her for her knowledge and her dedication. But is it not the case that even parents who are as diligent as she is still find that many teenagers can bypass these controls, that even if your child does not have access to a device, they can easily be shown the most harmful of material on the school bus? And isn't this actually about child development, and whether a child has the brain development to be able to use these devices safely, rather than just about education?
I wanted to talk about education and a number of other things in terms of the, you know, absolutely being shown things on the bus and stuff like that. Absolutely. Children and young people do what they can to subvert their parents' authority in all sorts of ways, not just when it comes to mobile phones. But part of the point that I was making is that I have the privilege to be able to do that. Parents who are working 2 jobs and really busy and, you know, dealing with many other children, for example, maybe don't have the time to be able to take those actions. So we can't put it all onto parental education, and we can't put it all onto education of the children either, because we know that however much information that we give children or young people, particularly teenagers, they're still going to make some really stupid decisions a lot of the time. I know I made plenty of stupid decisions as a teenager. I'm fairly sure that my children will do exactly the same. I grew up using message boards, which are now taken over by Reddit. I grew up using MSN Messenger. Kids now use Facebook Messenger, or WhatsApp. I grew up using IRC and Yahoo Chat, which have taken over by Discord. I grew up using Counter-Strike, which is now subsumed by Fortnite, and MySpace and Bebo, which are now things like Instagram. These things have been around for a very long time. We have needed an online safety act for 20 years, for more than 20 years. I was using these things in the 90s, and I was subject to the same issues that my children and other children are seeing today. You know, just because it wasn't so widespread doesn't mean it wasn't happening. It absolutely was. The issue with the Online Safety Act is it came far too late. I'm glad that we've got it, but it should have been here 20 years ago. It does not go far enough. It does not cover all of the things that we needed it to cover. We talked at length during the Online Safety Act about things like live streaming and how children should not be allowed to live stream at all. Under any circumstances. You could just ban children from live streaming and say that all platforms are not allowing children to live stream because of the massive increase that there is in the amount of self-generated child sexual abuse images. But the government chose not to do that. Now, we have got to have safety by design in these apps. We've got to ensure that Ofcom is given the powers, which even with the Online Safety Act it doesn't have, to stop platforms from allowing these things to happen, to effectively ban children from accessing it. If we've got incredibly effective age assurance, then some of the problems that the honourable member raises there, absolutely you will still get children trying to go around these things, but as far as we possibly can, if we've got that age assurance and that age gating, then children will not be able to access, for example, the stuff that Ofcom are doing around pornographic content. I do not see that there should be any way that any child should be able to access pornographic content once the Online Safety Act fully comes in and once they've got the full powers and full ability to do that. The other issue about the Online Safety Act is that it's too slow. We're in a lot of consultation procedures, we're in a lot of time, lead-in times. It should have come in far quicker than it is. And then we would have had this protection earlier for our children and young people. In terms of safety of devices by design, we need to have the safety of devices by design. I'm slightly concerned about the number of children who, are not lucky enough to get a brand new phone, and I think the honourable member who talked about passing on your phone to your child, covering that is really essential if we're going to have safety by design in devices. I do think that online app stores are not effectively covered or as effectively covered as they should be, particularly when it comes to age ratings on those app stores. So I spoke to one of the dating apps online who said that they want their app to be 18 plus. But that one of the stores has rated it as 16 plus, and they keep asking them to change it, and the store keeps refusing. That is totally ridiculous that we're in that situation. So the regulation of app stores is really, really important, especially when parents will use the app store's age to assume that that is roughly correct in the age that's put forward by the app stores. So we need to make changes in that, and we need to come down on the app stores because they are so incredibly powerful, and is a real moment where parents have got that, if they've got parental controls, have got that ability to make the changes. In terms of the safety online by design stuff, I've spoken already about live streaming. In terms of gaming, it is entirely possible for children to play online games without using chat functions. There are lots of online games that actually do not have any chat function at all. You can have your child play on Minecraft without having any chat. You cannot have your child play on Roblox without having any effective access to chat. Parents need to understand the difference between Minecraft and Roblox and not allow anyone to play Roblox because it's awful. There are those decisions that need to be taken in terms of the safety online by design. If you've got that effective age verification, if you've got that effective understanding of who the audience for each of these apps, for each of these online settings is, then you can ensure that the rules are in place. I'm not convinced yet that Ofcom has enough powers to say what is safe and what isn't safe for children online. I'm not convinced that even with the coming in of the Online Safety Act, there is the flexibility in order for them to say, right, if you have done your child access assessment and you think that your app is likely to be used by children, you cannot have live streaming on the app. I'm not convinced that they have enough teeth to be able to take that action. They do when it comes to illegal content, but when it comes to things that are harmful for children but legal for adults, there is not quite enough strength there for the regulator. I'll keep doing what I've been doing in this House, which is saying that the online world can be brilliant. It can be great. Kids can have a brilliant time playing online. They can speak to their friends, particularly if children are isolated or lonely. There are places where they can find fellowship and find other people that are feeling the same way, and that can be a positive thing. The honourable members laid out where often it's a negative thing, but it really can be a positive thing. There's so many benefits in terms of schoolwork, in terms of clubs, in terms of accessing friends, in terms of calendars. Cameras are great, actually. My children sometimes use their phones to go out and use the bird app to work out which birds are singing. I think that's brilliant that they can do things like that online. There are so many benefits, but we have got a responsibility, just as we do when our children are playing in the park, to make sure that they are safe. We have got responsibility as the legislators to ensure that the regulators have got enough teeth to make sure that the online world is safe so that they can get the benefits of the online world. They can get the benefits of using smartphones, but they are not subject to the extremely negative outcomes, particularly that my honourable friend from Stirling mentioned, his constituent, and the awful loss of their family. Children should never, ever have to face that online, and we've got a responsibility to regulate to ensure that they don't ever have to face it.
Yeah.
Sir George, and can I first of all put on record my enormous commendation to the Honourable Member for bringing forward this debate. These are issues which are very live in many, many houses and schools and communities up and down the country, and I think she's done an enormous service to the House by raising it not just today but on many different days. There may be different elements of it that where we don't entirely agree, but I think bringing these issues to the fore is absolutely vital. If I might, I will start. I used to be a priest in the Church of England in High Wycombe, and that's where I served my title, and most of my work was involved working with young kids, running the church youth groups and so on, and it was tough growing up as a young person, you know, all the issues of bullying and fear of missing out. I mean, that existed way back then as well, peer pressure, and in fact, I ended up doing a series of funerals for children who'd taken their own lives, all of whom knew each other. So I'm very conscious that, you know, growing up has never been easy. But when you add in the changes that have happened in these last 25, 30 years, because of the arrival of the internet, smartphones with cameras, social media, I would also add, in some cases, the problems for chaotic families and those who are really struggling financially as well. I'd also add into this equation in recent years the problems that COVID has brought, with lots of kids not being able to socialise in the way in school that all of us were able to do, because I know that we're all a little bit older than the average. So I'm painfully aware of the really difficult situation in which many young people are growing up today. And I'm also conscious that human eyes today see much more violence. I mean, I feel as if, I'm not making a flippant point, but I feel as if I've witnessed thousands of murders just because every week a lot of television is about crime. But in the old days, if a child went even to watch a film like Jaws, which has frightening moments in it, they would have been going with their parents. If they'd been watching a crime programme on television, they would have been watching it with their parents. Today, that probably isn't true. Nearly everything that they will have seen, they will see themselves on a small phone up in their room or in their friend's room, or I'm not sure whether the bike shed ever exists anymore, but round the back of the bike shed with some friends. And that of itself, I think, you know, it just does need to make us think and pause for a moment, I think, about the level of extreme violence and sexualised content that we are all witness to, and often children entirely on their own. I will in just 1 minute, but I want to make a couple more points first. The first is that I think sometimes it's meant that lots of kids have lost the ability to relate directly to other people, and that is in the end problematic. You know, we do need to deal with that. And social media, I think, I'm not sure about the grammar of that, have turbocharged some of the worst aspects of humanity. I mean, I think some people put on social media things that they would never, ever write down on a piece of paper. Never think to put their own name to. The issue of anonymity has been raised by a couple of members, and that's undoubtedly a part of this. You know, people creating some other identity for themselves, which somehow allows them to say absolutely some of the vilest, most despicable things imaginable. And I would add, this hasn't been mentioned, but I think the algorithms often contribute to this process. They're not neutral. Often they are exacerbating some of the worst aspects of humanity. And I'll come on to say a few things about the social media companies in a moment, but I think they need to take cognizance of that. Of course, I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
This morning before the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee this morning, had to be there and asked for permission to leave. But just on the issue, the issue of suicides, 24% of suicides for those aged 16 to 24 in 14-16. The figure for Northern Ireland is incredibly worrying. 1 in 10 children in Northern Ireland suffer from anxiety and depression, 25% higher than other UK jurisdictions. Does the Honourable Gentleman agree that when it comes to a policy, it must be UK-wide to ensure that our children have an opportunity?
Well, it needs to be UK-wide, but it also needs to recognise that devolution, because often we've been talking about schools, for instance, here, and some of those issues are devolved responsibilities in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. So I think we need to work across the whole of the UK. And of course, some of these issues are not just national, they're international, because we're dealing with companies whose profits are not, well, in many cases they may be made in this country, they may not necessarily be taxed in this country, but they're headquartered elsewhere. Just some first principles, if I might. The first is obviously that the first duty of any government is to keep its citizens safe. We say that endlessly and repeatedly, but we seem to always think that that means about national security and policing. Actually, it's also about online safety for children. I think the point has been made by several members today. Secondly, I believe that mental health is just as important as physical health, and anybody who just thinks it's about people, pulling up their socks or whatever, I mean, it doesn't meet the need that we all, I think, should have understood better by now. And I will say this very gently, but I think that it was a mistake for some to be referring to the Online Safety Act as legislating for hurt feelings. Hurt feelings can lead to very serious physical harm. We know the story of Brianna Jay, and incidentally, I won't rehearse the story, but everybody knows it, but I would pay enormous tribute to her mother, who I think has shown, extraordinary levels of human. I won't if she doesn't mind, because I've got several points that I need to make. I'm terribly sorry. The third point is physical and personal interaction with others is is vital to humanity. I apologise for the casual sexism of the early 17th century, but John Donne said, "No man is an island, entire unto himself. Seek not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am a part of humanity." We are fundamentally social beings. And anything that, and sometimes, of course, social media can enable that. I mean, there are grandparents who FaceTime with their grandchildren who would never have even dreamt of being able to do so 30 years ago, of course, and that is brilliant and great and wonderful. But where that social media replaces social interaction, I think we do have some long-term problems. Next, the social media and the internet can, of course, be enormously valuable. As I've already said, the Honourable Lady gets lost if she's not got Google Maps working. Sometimes I can't get it to work properly. There are so many ways. I mean, I don't know how anybody ever managed to meet up back in the 1960s and 1970s. So, of course, these are all wonderful innovations, and they're great too for kids, and they have a place in education as well. I want lots of kids to learn, how to create apps and be part of the vibrant economy in the UK, creating video games and all the rest of that. That is all part of this, but we can't just bow down before that altar and just surrender everything. And then my other fundamental principle is that no executive is above the law, which is why I believe that swift and full implementation of the Online Safety Act is so important. And I would echo the points that have already been made. I think the Minister probably agrees that it's taken us too long to get here with the Online Safety Act. And I understand, I'm not going to make any partisan points about the ups and downs and ins and outs and so on that we went through, but it has taken too long, and I do worry about the next processes, whether they're going to happen anywhere near fast enough. There are some things that we're keen to do. First of all, I think we need better mental health support for young people. It's shocking that 1 in 4 17 to 19-year-olds now has a mental health problem in this country, in England, and that's up from 1 in 10 in 2017. That's a very dramatic increase, and it may be that that is partly to do with COVID, but nonetheless, it's a significant problem. We want to put many more specialist mental health professionals into schools. I have family members who work in this field, and I know that they desperately need more support. Early support can, of course, prevent escalation and is really important. I would also point to the problem of brain injuries in schools, which I think has hardly been properly recognised yet. The government won't even be able to give us proper numbers of how many kids in schools have had a brain injury and have needed support. I would also add that I think that the creative industries can do, the creative education, can be a really important part of fostering better self-confidence, self-understanding, socialisation, working as part of a team and all those things. And one of the problems that we've had over recent years is that that has fallen away. Age guidelines must be truly effective. Absolutely must be effective. And it's very worrying that Ofcom's early research on stopping children finds that it's almost impossible to do so, even for children as young as 5. Now, that is highly problematic, and much more work needs to be done. I do think the social media companies, for all sorts of economic reasons of their own, have failed to regulate themselves. I think they have sometimes not entirely told the full truth about what their algorithms do or their economic model. And I do think that the divide between those who argue no nanny state and those who argue protect our children is a completely false dichotomy. The question is not what legislation, but how we make sure we have the right legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I first of all commend my honourable friend, the member for Penistone and Stockbridge, for securing this really important debate. She is an passionate campaigner, and I thank her for her engagement on numerous occasions, and including coming to see me on this issue. Can I also actually thank the member for Rondo? Worryingly, this is the second time in about 24 hours I found myself agreeing with him. He's called on me to resign, and before he asked me to come and join him on his benches, we recently had a space on our benches come available if he wants to agree with that. But I actually found myself agreeing with the member considerably, and I thank all members for their contributions. This is clearly a hugely complex issue, and I wanted to start today by first setting out the fact that before a minister, I am actually a parent. I probably make my colleagues sick by talking about this constantly, but it's one of the most rewarding and fulfilling privileges of a lifetime. But it's also one of the scariest things to be a parent. I have to worry about things, as we all do now, about things like, will they grow up to be healthy? Will they make friends at school? And we also now have to worry about, will they be safe in the online world, as we have to worry about them being safe in the offline world. But, Mr. Chairman, I also want my children to have a fulfilling childhood. I want them to learn the skills of tomorrow while we also protect them online, and therein lies the conundrum. So I want to start by focusing, I'm going to just make a little bit of progress, and I want to first start by focusing on the issue of research and data. The UK Chief Medical Officer, among others, has systematically reviewed the scientific evidence and concluded that an association between screen-based activities and poor mental health exists. But existing research does not yet prove a causal relationship. However, other investigations, such as those by Professor Height, as my friend from Penistone and Stockbridge brought up, into the link between these technologies and mental health, have suggested a harmful relationship. The scientific community is considering Professor Height's findings, and we are watching this discussion with interest. And I want to reassure honourable members that when it comes to research and the issue of causality, I am considering every option to make sure that we are leaving no stone unturned on this. And I will be looking at this very, very closely, and I want to make sure that any policy that comes forward is based on science and data.
I thank my honourable friend give way and for his very reassuring insistence that he will look into the data. But the US Surgeon General, who recently visited Parliament, made the point that if social media or smartphones were a drug, they would be immediately withdrawn from the market because of the harm that they are reputed to be causing. Now, even if the full causality is not established as he wants, isn't the evidence so clear now and the impact so harmful that it would be a sensible thing to do to withdraw social media before conducting that research?
Well, I thank the honourable member, and she's obviously made that point incredibly passionately here and privately as well. And I think the important thing is to make sure we have the data to back such a significant conclusion, because social media also does benefit young people as well as society, and I think there has to be a balance that has to be achieved. But to be clear, that does not, I'm just going to make some progress. To be clear, that does not rule out taking a precautionary approach. We need to consider the impacts carefully before taking action. As the NSPCC has clearly said before this debate itself, it's important that we strike the right balance between protecting children from harm whilst also allowing them to reap the benefits of safe internet use. We'll continue to explore options in this space, and I welcome further engagement and further research and evidence in this area to inform our policies.
Just on that point, would he agree that this isn't just about addiction for some, but it's about dependency and harm for many? And AI and artificial intelligence is only going to supercharge this. So may I ask whether he agrees that tech companies need to be held account, they need to ensure protections are in place, and Ofcom need to use the powers we've given them to force them to do that?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and let me say very, very clearly, there is no reason why the tech companies couldn't have acted over the past few years. There's no reason why they have to wait for the Ofcom's codes of practice. They should be getting on with the job. I said this as a backbencher, I mean it. The Online Safety Act is what we consider to be technology agnostic. It covers a lot of the instances of AI, but we obviously continue to monitor the situation.
Thank you. I'm so glad that he says that he's looking at all options. keep children safe. On this issue of preventing children from being able to upload sexual content, they're groomed into uploading these sexual images, will he look at this suggestion, which was suggested to me by the National Police Lead and others, of at system level putting a control so a phone cannot upload that content when the upload is by a child?
Thank you. And I'm going to be limited in further interventions just because of the time I've got, but I will write to my honourable friend on that particular issue. We're obviously also aware of the ongoing debate. I'm going to make some progress. Ongoing debate regarding the age at which children should have a smartphone. We recognise the risks that technology such as smartphones pose. However, I would always argue that a ban would not necessarily achieve the outcome that we're trying to do. As has been already said in this debate, children can find ways through it. We also have to consider who we're criminalising and how legislation would intervene in the lives of the private individual. We live in a digital age, and many parents do want their children to have a smartphone, as these provide many benefits to children and parents, such as staying connected while travelling alone. And while, in other words, they make sure that while we may be trying to protect children from one harm, it may well lead to another. So I speak to many, many parents who give me the other side of the argument, and I just want to put that on record. The decision of whether a child should have access to a smartphone should not be one for government. Instead, we should think about empowering parents to make the right call for their children and their individual circumstances. In fact, parents can obviously influence, as consumers, the market themselves, and it is my belief that choice is a liberty that parents and children should be allowed to exercise. I agree that online platforms must take responsibility for the harmful effects of the design of their services and their business models. That's why the Online Safety Act is a groundbreaking piece of legislation, and it does put the onus on platforms to ensure that children are protected. And I want to reassure parents that this legislation will change significantly how our children grow up in the online world. If social media companies do not do the right thing, then we have given Ofcom the teeth to go after them, and I fully expect them to do so. Children's well-being is at the heart of the Act, and the strongest protections are for children. Under the new regulations, social media platforms will need to assess the risks of their services facilitating illegal content and activity. That includes illegal abuse, harassment, or stirring up hatred. And they will need to assess the risk of children being harmed on their services by content which doesn't cross the illegal threshold, but which is harmful to them. And I know that was brought up quite considerably. I'm just going to make some progress. I'm very short on time, and I want to give the honourable member some time to respond as well. And I want to be unequivocal here. The Online Safety Act ensures that the UK is the safest place to be online, requiring all companies to take robust action against illegal content. Last week, Ofcom published the draft codes of practice for the child safety rules. These protections are a real game changer and will establish foundations to protect generations to come. And I commend Ofcom for their proposals. They rightly put the onus on the big tech to do the right thing and keep our children safe. And let me say this to big tech. With great reward comes great responsibility. They have that responsibility. They must act. The part of the codes identified risks that children need to be protected from, and they also set out the requirement for platforms to implement highly effective age assurance technology to prevent children encountering harmful content on their services, including pornography and content that depicts serious violence and content that promotes serious self-harm, suicide, or eating disorders. I'm going to try and make some progress, Mr. Chairman. There's quite a bit to do here, but I'm conscious of the time here as well. But tackling suicide and self-harm material is a key objective of the Online Safety Act. We've already heard too many stories of the devastating impact of this content, and I want to commend all of the parents that have campaigned on this issue. They have gone through the most heartbreaking, heart-wrenching challenges that are just unimaginable, and we continue to engage with them, and I commend them for all their bravery. And there is obviously a live consultation on age assurance at the moment. I encourage all members to engage on that. My honourable friend for Redditch raised a number of key issues. I'll be writing to her to respond, and she also talked about parental responsibility, which is important, and I think she raised the issue of chat functions, which are also in the scope of the Online Safety Act. The member for Stirling spoke about the tragic case of Murray Dewey, and I'd like to offer my condolences to the parents, but also my open door, and I'd be more than happy to meet with them and willing to speak with with him in attendance. The members for Stoke-on-Trent North and Great Grimsby talked about the responsibility of DFE, and I'm sure that's been heard, and I'll obviously continue to engage with ministers. And the my right honourable friend for North East Hampshire talked about his Nokia 3210. I see Nokia have started remarketing the 3210, so look forward to a Christmas present. Not from me, but maybe someone who likes him. But I wish him all the best of that. I'm going to make just my final comment, which is I'll be happy to meet with the member for Penistone and Stocksbridge, as with the Secretary of State.
Miriam Coates, to briefly
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and can I thank all honourable members who've contributed so compellingly to this debate. I'm hugely encouraged by the strength of feeling and the unanimity in this chamber. But I just want to make a final point. This is not a debate about liberty, it's not a debate about freedom, it's not a debate about parenting, it's not a debate about technology, it's a debate about child development. And the human brain is not wired to learn from passive consumption. It is wired to learn from real-life interaction. That's how children learn. However safe we make the internet from damaging content, children will never, ever gain the skills, the knowledge and the well-being they need from staring at a screen. They will always need real-life interaction. That's why we must restrict screens and ban social media for under 16s, because otherwise they will never learn.
The question is that the House has... The question is that the House has considered the impact of smartphones on social media and children. Many that didn't say aye. On the contrary, no, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.